Good evening. My name is Kenda McKenzie. I'm the Director of Regulatory Services with Halifax Water, and my group is tasked with overseeing stormwater drainage complaints and some technical issues and such when it comes to stormwater billing. And I'm joined here tonight with Kathy O'Toole, the General Manager of Halifax Water, Jeff Myrick, our Manager of Communications, Mark McGonnell, our Stormwater Engineer, and Siju Matthew, who oversees the project management of the stormwater expansion. And you will hear in the background potentially as we get to the Q&A portion of our session, the voice of Jake Fulton, and he's running our slides for us tonight. So I see that we have a number of people have been able to sign in and join us, and thank you. So we're going to get started. And basically, as I said, we've gone through the introductions of staff that are here tonight to hopefully address any questions and concerns that you may have. I'm going to go through a PowerPoint that replicates some of the information that was provided at the in-person sessions that we had in your communities. Also, we're going to try and address some of the questions that we were faced with during those sessions during the PowerPoint. After the presentation is completed, we will open the floor. You're able to do questions through the chat, and Jake will be able to monitor those and put those forward. Or we'll also open up the floor using the raise hand feature, and you'll be able to ask your questions, and Jake will unmute you so that we can have some dialogue if you so desire to ask questions in that manner. So we do ask that everybody be respectful when you're making your comments and posing your questions. Any use of any disrespectful language will result in that person being muted by Jake for the remainder of the session. And we do also note that this session is being recorded and will be published on our website. So if there's any personal information or anything like that that you don't want to have shared or published, please refrain from using that. So we just want to make sure you're aware of that. And throughout the presentation, we'll highlight some of our website links and places where if you do have a more personal question that you would like to ask with some more details, that you can reach out to us to try and solve that after the presentation. Next slide, Jake. So just, we'll have some refreshers, but there's the question mark on you should be able to see that as part of the talk bar, and you can put your questions into the chat. And then next slide, please. And then when we open the floor up for any verbal questions, there's the raise hand feature, and then Jake will go through those in order and call upon you by name, and we'll be able to unmute you and have some dialogue on the stormwater expansion. Next slide. So basically, we're about to do a review of the general information relating to the stormwater expansion that's proposed. The area that we're looking at right now, we refer to as Area 4, and it includes the communities of East Preston, Lake Echo, Mineville, and the western areas of Lawrencetown. Next slide, please. So one of the big questions everybody has is, why is Halifax Water responsible for stormwater management? Back in 2007, HRM transferred the responsibility for wastewater and stormwater services to Halifax Water, with the understanding that we would continue to provide services to the communities that the wastewater and stormwater systems were located in, and ensure that the infrastructure was properly funded, managed, and upgraded so that it would provide a good level of service for the residents. The service boundary that exists today, and that was transferred in 2007, basically aligns with previous road ownership boundaries that were set between the province and HRM. In July of 2021, Halifax Regional Council approved the acceptance of additional roads from the province and requested that Halifax Water assume the responsibility for the delivery of those stormwater services based on the concepts and agreements that were set in 2007. In June of 2022, the road transfer from the province is slated to occur. And that is the timeline that we are trying to get our approvals through the Utility Review Board for, so that we could start providing stormwater services at that date. Next slide, please. So what is Halifax role and why charge rates? Halifax Water is an integrated water utility. We operate as a not-for-profit, and we're regulated by the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. HRM transferred wastewater and stormwater responsibility to Halifax Water in 2007. And as a result, Halifax Water is obligated to provide stormwater service and accept assets when any provincial road infrastructure is transferred to HRM in future years. Halifax Water is also required to recover costs for the provision of each of our services. So, and there cannot be any cross-subsidization for any of the services we provide. So basically, we have to establish charges to provide water service, wastewater service, and stormwater services in the different communities that where those services exist. And we're not able to take money that we've collected from water services or water rate and apply it to infrastructure upgrades or operations of the wastewater service, and vice versa. So everything has to be recovered for the service that is provided by the person, from the person that is receiving that service. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we wanted just to give an overview since this started is how we've communicated with some of the property owners about the proposed expansion in stormwater service. In October, after we were requested by the municipality to provide stormwater service to the two expanded areas, we made an application to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. And part of the application is just to simply ask the board to accept the new boundary and allow us to start providing service to the communities within that boundary by June of 2022. Late October, Halifax Water notified some of the property owners within the impacted areas via address letters to let them know that this was happening and that there'd be future communications. In November, letters were sent to all the property owners inviting them to in-person sessions that we had in each of the communities. And we also relied on social media to promote some of these events. In November and December, we had 4 in-person sessions in the communities of East Preston, Lake Echo, Mineville, and the western areas of Lawrencetown. And there was approximately 100 people in attendance over those 4 sessions. In January, as a result of some of the feedback that received in the public information sessions held in November and December, we became aware that some of the notifications might not have reached people in a timely manner, or there might have been concerns about the timing of some of the sessions. So we committed to hosting more in-person sessions in January of 2022. However, as we know, COVID had different plans for us, and so we had to change how we were delivering additional information and decided to host these virtual sessions. And so we've had one session in Area 1, which is the Tantallon St. Margaret's Bay area, and then tonight is the session that we had planned for the Area 4. And I also, as I said, wanted to highlight that we have more information on the expansion itself. If you go to our website and type in stormwater expansion, and you'll be able to find some of the information that was provided to residents today. And also there's ability to sign up to be contacted with future information as it becomes available. Next slide, please. So I know it's hard to see, but this is available on our website and you'll be able to look at it in greater detail. But Area 4 is the yellow area that you see here. And it's hard to see, but Highway 107 kind of goes up. If you can follow Jake's mouse, up the middle, and then the 4 communities are 2 on either side of the 107 that will be providing service. The orange color boundary is the existing stormwater service boundary that we provide stormwater service to today. And we wanted to highlight in setting the actual boundary lines for Area 1 and this Area 4. HRM staff worked with the province and looked at areas where they could efficiently and effectively provide service to the communities, looking at areas where it made sense to provide snow service out to or garbage collection. And then HRM also worked with our staff to look at where did drainage areas lie and where did it make sense to provide stormwater service to, so that we weren't cutting through certain property boundaries and such. And also they looked at what HRM has community boundaries. And so the community boundaries form some of the yellow boundary lines that you see here on the map. Next slide, please. So just walking through some of the basics that we use in trying to establish the stormwater charge and the provision of stormwater service. So one of the big questions is, what is stormwater? And it's essentially precipitation of all kinds. It includes rain, melting snow, ice, groundwater, discharge, and surface water. And the big thing that we have to be mindful of, even though the hydrologic cycle, we do see surface water going back into the ground through groundwater recharge, there's also a lot of impervious surfaces that exist in developed communities, such as roofs, parking lots, and driveways, and other hard surfaces that result in stormwater runoff and causing the need to provide stormwater management systems to collect the water and convey it properly. Next slide, please. So why does stormwater management matter? And as I noted, there's a lot of hard surfaces, and that prevent the water from going back into the ground naturally. And when that's not managed properly and directed to the appropriate locations, it can cause increased flooding risks and damage to private and public property and infrastructure during precipitation events. And we also have to be mindful of climate change as it increases the risk of these events, causing more damage and destruction to our communities. Next slide, please. So another big question that we're faced with, even since 2013 when this first started, is what is stormwater management? And when we're explaining to residents and customers how they get service and why they're paying for this service, you have to give consideration to when a stormwater system is designed. And so when a ditch or a catch basin or a pipe is sized and placed in certain locations, it has to be done so and has to be large enough that it can receive all of the water that will ultimately run off to that location through that whole catchment area. So it's one thing I'd ask that you keep that in mind as we go through the rest of some of the slides about how we consider somebody getting service. And it's not just about water that may flow off the front of your property, but it could be off the back or the side of your property. The other key aspects of stormwater management is operating and maintaining the system so that it controls and reduces any impacts that the rainwater or melted snow may have on the streets and into lawns and yards and other sites. And the other thing that we have to keep in mind during precipitation events, the ground may be saturated. So if we have a number of days when there's rain and it gets so wet and soaked that water can no longer go into the ground, or on conditions that we see outside today where the ground is frozen, that saturated or frozen ground is basically going to replicate hard packed surface and increase the runoff that comes from a precipitation event. And eventually that water will run off into streams, rivers, lakes, wetlands, or oceans. Next slide, please. So there are a number of different infrastructure components that Halifax Water uses when providing stormwater service. And we provide service to tens of thousands of customers throughout the existing service boundaries. And so you may see a series of ditches and culverts, and the culverts may be driveway culverts or cross culverts. And also there may be catch basins, pipe systems, and manhole systems that will convey the water in more urban areas. As well, we have a number of retention ponds or holding tanks, and their sole purpose is to mitigate large volumes or peaks of storm water as it runs off into different areas in the system. And next slide, please. So another big question that we've received is, what is the value for Halifax Water stormwater customers? And as we said, it's very important to manage stormwater properly, to protect your property, to protect public infrastructure such as roads and the environment, and making sure that the roads are passable during storm events. Halifax Water Stormwater Services is designed to ensure the flow of water is managed and customers are protected. And part of this service includes routine inspections of the system, monitoring for and removal of any blockages that may occur in ditches or culverts and pipes, and conducting any necessary repairs in the ditches and culverts. And the culverts are not only just the cross culverts that you see as you drive down a street, but also it includes driveway culverts. And so the culvert that is adjacent to the street that goes into your driveway and you access your property over, that plays a big part in managing and conveying the stormwater system. It's part of the public stormwater system. Next slide, please. Another big question that arises is, who's responsible for what? And we're basically proposing that the same responsibility structure be expanded into the expansion areas June 1st. And Halifax Water would become responsible for efficient flow of water through the stormwater systems. One of the things that comes up a lot is related to grass and growth in the ditch systems. And basically any vegetation that may cause a blockage of the stormwater system, Halifax Water will address. But if it's not impacting the water and it's more cosmetic, we will plan to leave it in place. It also acts as a natural filter to the environment, any sediment and such that might get deposited in ditches. The vegetation acts as a natural filter to help the downstream systems. On June 1st, the regional municipality, Halifax, will be responsible for roads, and that would be services such as snow removal, paving, pothole repairs. They're also responsible for bridges, and when we talk about bridges, it's a span that's 3 meters or greater. So you may see some large culverts, and if they're less than 3 meters, those are considered culverts and our responsibility. But you may see in some areas some really large culverts, and they might be more than 3 meters, and that would be considered a bridge. HRM will also be responsible for roadside access, so shoulders and getting in and off the streets onto private property. They're also responsible for road visibility, sight lines at intersections, near signs and around curves, and any other non-stormwater assets that might be in the right of way, so signage and traffic lights, those types of things. The other thing that the municipality, when it comes to vegetation around ditches, they would respond if the vegetation is obstructing the view at intersections and not allowing motorists to be able to see around the corners of an intersection. Next slide, please. So there's a couple of factors when we're establishing the charge. And one of the big things is, as we noted before, the impervious area is a factor in stormwater management. And Halifax Water relies on satellite imagery, and we develop information for every property, and we identify how much impervious area is on your property. So that's your roofs, your driveways, your walkways, anything like the hard surfaces and hard packed gravels. And so every property, we know how much impervious area exists. Next slide. So then one of the things we look at after that is, will stormwater leave your property and enter into the stormwater system? And this goes back to the concept that I mentioned earlier, that in designing and maintaining stormwater systems and ensuring good stormwater management is occurring, we have to give consideration to all the water that will eventually get to that system. So you may not have a ditch or a culvert in front of your property, and water may run off the back or out the side, and it may go across your neighbor's property. It may go across a number of properties before it reaches the system. But if it is determined that it reaches the system, then you would be considered as receiving service, and you would be considered a customer. And so we have drainage mapping and are able to determine where the water goes once it lands on the surfaces in your community. And typically, you'll see ditches and culverts in the rural areas and pipes and catch basins in the urban areas. However, there are exceptions to both, and we have some communities that have both pieces of infrastructure within them. Next slide, please. So when we go to set the rate, we have just chosen to use impervious area as basically the way to determine the bill. And it's a method that's used across North America in setting stormwater charges with other utilities and municipalities. And as I noted, we identify that the impervious area for your property, and based on that, and if water will leave your property and gets to our system, we will place you in a tier. And the tiers range from 1 to 5, and it's $0 to $81 under the current rates. And so basically, we would look at how much impervious area you have and determine what impact that relates to from a charge perspective and apply that charge to your property. We also have, if you notice at the bottom of the slide, culvert only service. So there are properties that have less than 50 square meters of impervious area, or the water may drain away from the road or the stormwater system and go to an ocean or a lake, and it may never touch Halifax Water infrastructure. So, however, if you have a driveway culvert, that culvert is our responsibility to maintain and replace ultimately if it fails. And so in order to recover some costs for those services, the culvert only customers receive a bill of $14 a year from Halifax Water. So to give some perspective to the billing and what you may be assessed, my property, I have a 2-acre lot. I'm on well and septic, and I have a 1,200 square foot house and a 24 by 24 foot garage, and my driveway is about 100 feet off the road. And when I add up all of my impervious area, that places me in a tier 4. And so the bill that I receive from Halifax Water is $54 a year. Now, moving across the table to the right-of-way charge and what that means for everybody. When Halifax Water went to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board in 2013, one of the aspects, or one of the things that we had to address, was the amount of impervious area that HRM owned. And when going to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board, we have to follow certain principles in setting rates and charges. And one of the main principles is an entity or customer that receives a service should pay for that service. And it's referred to as cost, cause, or pay. And so in looking at the amount of impervious area that was draining to the storm systems, it was determined that HRM would be a customer of Halifax Water and receive a stormwater bill. And that bill is a little over $3 million. And so HRM requested Halifax Water on their behalf to collect that amount of money from all of the stormwater customers. And when you look at the number of stormwater customers in the bill that was being submitted to HRM for payment, it worked out to $40 a person customer. So you would see on your bill a charge from Halifax Water for the impact your impervious area has on the system, and also your share of paying for the HRM right-of-way impervious area. So in my case, my total bill is $94 a year And so that's, and I'll show a bill in the next slide. I do want to note for non-residential customers, so that's commercial businesses, industrial and institutional entities, the rate is based on the impervious area on their property by square meter, and the current charge is 13.5 cents. And they too have to pay the $40 right-of-way charge for HRM share. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a graphic. So for those that do receive stormwater service from us, they'll see two lines on the bill. Basically, there's the stormwater charge, which is the site-related flow, which I highlighted would be between $14 and $81. And then the HRM right-of-way charge, which is $40. So if it is determined you're going to be a customer, then you would receive a bill and you would have two line items that reflect what you see here. Next slide, please. When we went to some of the communities and during our public information sessions in person, there were a few questions that seemed to be common, and we wanted to highlight those here in case those are questions that you have yourself tonight. One of the big questions was, does this mean that water or wastewater services are coming to my area? And the answer is no. Stormwater service is unrelated to water service or wastewater service. And HRM is responsible for extending water or wastewater service into developed communities. And if you would like your community to be considered for an extension of water or wastewater, you can go through your local counselor and they could bring that forward to staff to see what would be involved and how much it would cost and all the details around it. Next slide, please. Another big question that has come up a lot is my property is located on a private road and I do not have any public road frontage. Could I still become a customer? And the answer is yes. If you go back to the portions that I described on whether or not water flows out the front or the back or the rear of your property, you may live on a private road and the private road could have its own private stormwater infrastructure. But if stormwater flows off of your property out the back or out the side and ultimately gets to infrastructure owned by Halifax Water, you would be considered a customer. We also want to note that the way some private roads are configured, they may be a parcel by themselves. And if the parcel itself drains to the stormwater service system owned by Halifax Water, that parcel would be assigned a charge as well for the impervious area that exists on it. Next slide, please. Another big question, and we kind of touched on it already, but I do not have a ditch or a culvert. Could I still become a customer? And the answer is yes. And it, again, goes to the concept that if water flows from your property to our system, you would become a customer. And the other thing that came up through some of the discussions that we had, some people thought that the charge was going to be based on the amount of frontage that they have on the road. And as I described, it's based on the impervious area that exists on your property and what tier that you get placed in for charges. So it's not related to your frontage. Next slide, please. And we touched on it a bit with the culvert only scenario, but water from my property flows directly to a lake or the ocean. Could I still become a customer? And we would look at where the water goes. And if no storm water from your property drains through any Halifax Water infrastructure at any point, you will not become a customer and therefore you will not be billed. However, we do note that if you do have a driveway culvert at the street, you would be charged the annual $14 culvert only fee as well as the HRM fee. Next slide, please. So when will I know if I'm going to become a customer? So currently Halifax Water staff are collecting and analyzing all the data to determine where the infrastructure exists and where the water is draining to. And we're going through the process now of analyzing which properties are draining to the stormwater systems. And once we identify which properties are draining to the stormwater systems, we will then start assigning the tiers based on the impervious area. And we intend to communicate with all residents in the summer whether or not you're going to become a customer, and if you are going to become a customer, what your anticipated charges will be. And the first round of bills will not be issued until the earliest January of 2023, but they're typically, for these types of bills, we issue them between January and April of every year. Next slide, please. Another question that we received a lot was, will I receive a reduction in my taxes? And so we want to highlight that provincial income taxes are set by the province, and property taxes are established by the municipality. And Halifax Water does not participate or have any say or oversight in either of those taxation systems. The transfer of infrastructure was a result of an agreement between the province and HRM. So there was an agreement for roads to be transferred to the municipality. These types of service exchanges have happened in the past. The last one was in 2006, and that is reflective of today's current stormwater boundary that we have in place. There's no funding for stormwater services being transferred to HRM or to Halifax Water for this current transfer that's being considered. The other part of the agreement that we want to highlight is that other municipalities pay the province for road maintenance on provincial roads within their regions. As part of amalgamation, HRM was exempt from these costs, and with the condition that the municipality would assume responsibility for the roads once the communities reached a certain density or population within the communities. And when these discussions first happened a couple of years ago, there were 4 areas being considered as part of the request or the transfer that the province wanted to enter into with the municipality. And when the municipality did the analysis on the density within the 4 communities, only 2 communities met that density threshold, and that's Area 1 and Area 4. And so that's part of why we're here tonight, is to explain some of the nuances around this, and we are seeking the Utility Review Board to expand the current boundary to include areas 1 and 4. Next slide, please. So what will Halifax Water do when it takes over stormwater services in 2022? Our primary goal will be to ensure that the stormwater system continues to function and avoid damage to roads and private property. If stormwater system infrastructure is currently working properly and does not jeopardize roads, driveways, and private property, little will change. We will continue to operate and maintain the existing infrastructure as it sits today. However, if an area of the system is not functioning as intended, we will investigate and undertake the appropriate maintenance that is required to resolve that situation. And if an area has a water runoff or ponding problem, Halifax Water will work with HRM to investigate, and the appropriate agency will take the required work. On those last couple of points, want to highlight that we are not going to be going in to install new infrastructure. There were a few residents that we engaged with, and they were concerned that we were going to go in and start excavating and installing new infrastructure. Our mandate is to maintain the infrastructure that is there. If it needs to be replaced, we will undertake that replacement. If there is a chronic drainage issue or ponding problem on a street and it needs new infrastructure to resolve it, that is something that HRM may have to consider undertaking. And then once they would install the infrastructure, Halifax Water would maintain it. But again, that's something that we will work with HRM closely on determining what may need to happen in certain areas, and we'll respond back to the residents accordingly. Next slide, please. So another thing that's happened quite a bit, if you do not agree with Halifax Water that you are a customer, or you do not agree about the impervious area on your property and the tier that you've been placed on, and ultimately the charge you've been assigned, we have an appeal process. Informally, you can call our call center or send in an email and ask for clarity on how you get service. And one of our employees or staff will get back to you and walk you through that and explain what's going on. If you want to go through a formal process, you can launch a formal appeal, which we call a notice of objection. And all the information is on our website on the process that you need to go through to do that. We would review your file and provide you with a written letter and a sketch showing how you get service and where the water goes and how it enters into our system. And we'll also check your impervious area and follow up with information on that as well. If it's still determined that you receive service, and we have made exemptions in the past when new information has been provided to us or something that anomaly that wasn't initially noticed is presented. But if we still consider you as a customer and you are receiving service and you still disagree, we have a process with a dispute resolution officer, which is a third party to Halifax Water. And again, the information is on our website, and you can reach out to the dispute resolution officer and they will review your file. They'll take information from you, information from us, and render a decision. When their decision is rendered, if you still disagree with that decision or Halifax Water disagrees with that decision, both of us have 30 days to initiate an appeal to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board and have the decision reviewed at that level. And again, all this information is on our website, but once you're notified that you'll become a customer and you disagree, you can go through this process. Next slide, please. So just kind of doing an overview of how we got here and some of the next steps. The proposed transfer of the roads from the province to HRM occurred in July of 2021, and council approved the transfer. They followed up with a request to Halifax Water to provide stormwater services to the systems within that expanded boundary. And we started conducting preliminary data gathering in September. We made our application to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board in October. And then in October through to now, we conducted a communication strategy and plan with the residents in the areas 1 and 4, doing in-person sessions, posting information in the local newspaper and medias, and social media as well, to try and get the message out about what was going on and how it was going to transpire. Part of the process with the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board, they had a deadline of February 2nd for residents to submit letters of comment, and realized that that has passed. But when we did our communications in January, knowing that we couldn't have in-person meetings, we highlighted that date so that people would have an opportunity to provide letters of comment to the Utility Review Board. And as of February 2nd, I believe there was about 22 letters of comment that have been submitted to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board as part of this process. If you want to get more information or details about the process and what's been submitted to date, you can go to their website, and we also have a link on our website with the matter number, the file number, so that you can easily reference it and find it. Next slide, please. So what we're doing now, where we're at, we had in virtual session in Area 1 on February 3rd, and then tonight is for Area 4. On February 9th, we have to file what is called a rebuttal to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board. And essentially that's just going to be a summary of some of the things we've heard, the communication plans and that we've executed, and some of the common questions and everything, and trying to address those and present that to the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board for their consideration. Then the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board currently is doing what is referred to as a paper hearing whereby they'll review all the information that they've received from us, the information they've received from residents, and go through and deliberate and determine whether or not the expansion can be considered for areas 1 and 4. The transfer is official on June 1st of 2022, and HRM would be responsible for providing services to the road system. And then depending on the timeline with the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board, it'll determine whether Halifax Water starts service on that date or if it's a different date. And as we did get all the information that we've been gathering and determine who's going to receive service and who's going to be a customer, we're going to be communicating back with the property owners to tell you whether or not you will be a customer, and if you are, what tier you would be and what charge to expect, with the first round of bills not being issued until January to April of 2023. Next slide, please. And we're now on to questions. And so I'm going to go to Jake to see if we have any written questions or if we're going to go straight to verbal.
We do have a few written questions. I will start with Debbie Simmons. Debbie asked, what are the benefits of this service to the community?
Thank you. So the benefits to the community will be ensuring that the stormwater systems that exist are operating as they are intended to do, and making sure that they are free of debris, they're not clogged, and that water can flow properly from your property or from the street system and get directed to the appropriate receiving area, be it the ocean, lake, stream. And the benefits will be focused on making sure the roads are passable during rain events because the ditch system is working properly. Also with culvert maintenance, get into a replacement process for cross culverts. And then if anybody has a failed driveway culvert, we will respond and replace the driveway culvert. So at a high level, those are the things that we would be responsible for, and the benefits that the community will see.
And a question from Susan Cole. If we do not receive our water or sewer from Halifax Water, but through our own managed well and septic systems, and we live in an area where there are no ditches or culverts, should we be expected to pay for these services?
So and that's a common question that we receive. This is not related to whether or not you have a well and septic. Stormwater service would be independent of those criteria. And as I stated in my example, I'm on well and septic, but I have a stormwater system on my street and downstream of my property. And so I do receive stormwater service. If your area is such that there are no ditches or culverts, or you do not drain to a ditch or a culvert, then you will likely not be a customer. But that's part of the review that we're going through right now. And that's what you'll receive a letter later in the summer about whether or not your property is viewed as receiving service from Halifax Water for stormwater.
And another question from Debbie Simmons. Is there a history of road flooding in these areas?
I might go to Mark if we have, and the issue for us right now is the province is currently responsible for road maintenance and ditch and culvert maintenance in these communities. So we are communicating with them, and we're also relying on historical knowledge that some residents have shared with us through the public information sessions on where some problem areas may exist. And so we had a meeting with HRM staff last week to identify what they knew and what we knew of some of the areas as residents are reaching out to their counselor or to us directly, both of our organizations. So there are going to be areas that we aren't made aware of come June 1st, but we will have a system. We have a call center that if any road drainage or flooding issues occur, those can be identified and sent in to us for triage and response. And we also want to note too that there are areas throughout the existing stormwater system that are chronic. We are planning capital upgrades, or we plan regular operations and replacements to try and address those. We work with HRM on where both of our agencies need to participate in addressing current flooding areas. But sometimes something may happen because of the nature of the storm and the nature of the weather conditions in advance of the storm. So if a few years ago, you might remember we had freeze thaw quite a bit, and a lot of culverts got blocked. And so flooding happened in certain areas where it never happened before, because we would have blocked culverts that we couldn't get cleared in time for the next rain that would happen. And so those ones we deal with as they arise, and rely on customers to call them in, or those to be brought forward to our attention for dealing with them.
Daniel Neems, I believe I might be mispronouncing that. Sorry, Daniel. Could you please post a link for disputing findings? So I can post that link, absolutely. I'll just echo something that Kenda said earlier, that the dispute process does first begin with being made aware that you're a customer, and the first step is contacting Halifax Water. And another question from Daniel: what kind of satellite imagery is being used? Is it just Google Maps, or is it some other service?
So I'm going to start this, but I'm probably going to turn the floor over to either Saju or Mark, but it relies on LiDAR satellite imagery. And I'm going to turn it over to the specialist and subject matter expert. So Saju, if you can provide any more details on the mapping, that would be great.
We don't use Google imagery. We actually use satellite imagery that is quite high resolution. And then we have started to use LiDAR data, which also allows us much more clearer picture of what the terrain looks like and the elevations around the terrain. And so those two things are what we have been using. But another thing that we have started to utilize recently is getting this depth information and the land terrain information. We have been able to utilize geographic information system software to analyze where the drainage actually takes place and how the path of the drainage that takes place. So between all three things, we will be able to identify how much impervious area that is there on the property, and also what the path of the drainage would be.
All right.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I have nothing to add to that. The only thing I would say is if you have any, again, through the appeal process, if you feel that there's inaccuracies there, it's something we'll certainly look at and investigate further on and follow up with.
All right. A question from Dan Russell: what if the water from the system flows into your property currently?
So there are cases where water, we call it sheet flow, will flow from the road, or if it's a false ditch, and that simply means that there's no back to the ditch, and it flows onto private property. It's something that we would look at and possibly look at in conjunction with HRM to determine whether there is a deficit in the infrastructure or if there's future work that needs to happen. And so those are very case-by-case specific situations that we do send out. Usually Mark will go out and do the assessment and see what's going on.
All right. Another question from Daniel Neems. Again, sorry if I butchered your last name. I live on top of a hill, quite a large one. How does that affect me potentially getting stormwater charge?
So again, we're going to use the satellite imagery and the contour mapping, drainage mapping that we have. We're going to look to see where your water flows from the top of the hill. And If it does reach our system, then you would be assessed the charge based on the impervious area of your property. And basically, what we're doing there is we're looking at what each property, what their impact is on the system, and assigning a charge for basically their share of the replacement, the maintenance, the operations of that system.
Yeah, all right. Let's see, from Jean-Marc Couturier, I think, sorry. In 15 years of living here, I've never seen a City of Halifax team checking the water drain on my street. Why should I be expected to pay?
So we're not able, because we don't have the boundary expansion right now, we're not able to have our crews do work or do investigations or anything on the streets or do maintenance. Once the expansion, and right now the responsibility lies with the provincial transportation department. Once the expansion would occur, then similar to seeing our vehicles out there, you'd also see HRM vehicles out there, because both of our agencies will now be responsible for providing services, different types of services, but providing services to these communities. That's why you wouldn't have seen us out there yet, because until June 1st, the responsibility for the streets and the stormwater system still lie with the province. You may see some of our staff out there collecting survey data or locations of culverts and information on the assets that are out there in preparation for June.
There's another question from Daniel, which I'll be able to answer. How many people are currently viewing this meeting? So at the moment, there are 15 members of the public viewing the meeting, and we will be posting this recording on our webpage, the halifaxwater.ca/stormwater expansion. The meeting that took place on February 3rd has already been posted to that page, so it's available on our YouTube channel and on that webpage. And the next question from Debbie Simmons: will the storm systems be draining into our lakes/ponds? We do a lot of fishing, etc.
So the storm systems are going to continue to drain where they're draining now. So if they drain to the ponds, if they drain to the ocean, they will continue to drain there now and in the future.
From Daniel Neems: what is the name of the satellite service being used?
That I'm going to have to defer to Saju if he has it.
I'm going to say it is Worldview Imagery from Digital Globe. What I don't know exactly is which, I know it's 50 centimeter resolution, so it's half a meter resolution. That's the level of details I have right now, but we can always get you more details.
All right, a question from Deb Day: we have waterfront property and the road is higher than the house. We have a culvert. At no point would there be runoff from our property affecting any other property, including anything owned by HRM. Should I assume we should only be charged the $14 and not an HRM right-of-way charge?
So once you are considered a customer of ours, depending on whether you're in one of the 5 tiers or the culvert only, you automatically get the right-of-way charge. So if you get the culvert only charge from us, you will automatically get the right-of-way charge from HRM. And based on the description of your property, without seeing where everything goes from the water that you're draining to, if it doesn't touch our system, it sounds like you would probably just get the culvert only from us and then the $40 from HRM.
A question from Susan Cole: do residents have access to see this satellite imagery?
So yes, as you remark, I know when somebody appeals, there's information that's provided, but I don't think it's publicly right now.
No, at this point in time, this is not public, but if a customer raises questions about their property and saying that, let's say, for example, that they don't agree with the amount of impervious area, that comes in as a notice of objection. And as part of the notice of objection, details are shown in the letter response that goes back to the customer. Mark?
That is correct. Yeah, no, we definitely, we review whether it's, they get site related flow service, culvert only, whatever it may be, as well as the impervious area. So mapping is not always sent back out if the tier, you know, they appeal their their impervious area. But just say it's found to be 250 and we do a manual check and it comes out to be 260 or 270, you know, they're still within that tier. So a map typically is not sent back out, but you can request that and we can send a map out with it. That's not a problem.
Additionally, later on this year, we're going to be launching the next phase of a customer portal that we currently have. And customers who are receiving a stormwater bill would be able to sign on to the customer portal and get a breakdown of your bill and the supporting details for your stormwater charge. So you'd be able to see how many square meters of impervious area your property has been measured for, how it relates to the tier structure, and the breakdown of your bill. We're hoping you'll also be able to see a polygon for your property showing what portion was impervious and what portion is deemed impervious.
Just to add to that, if it is considered that you are getting service, the invoice that you get from Halifax Water will have the impervious area identified for your property. And it will also tell you, if you're a residential customer, it will tell you what tier you fall into, and accordingly the bill will break down the charges. But yeah, that's it.
All right. Debbie Simmons has asked, will there be new infrastructure or will you be maintaining?
What we'll be doing is maintaining, but what is included in the maintaining is as assets start to get end of life. So you may see corrugated, the old steel culverts existing in your community, and as they start to rust out and fail, those will be replaced. And so we have an asset management program whereby we look at how long assets are good for, and we start to program in replacement of the assets as they start to fail and reach their end of life and effectiveness. So we're going to maintain what's there, but also address failures of existing infrastructure and start planning replacement on our regular cycles.
All right, Jean-Marc has a follow-up. You did not answer my question. We have had no problem and have not seen any city or Halifax Water team in 15 years. We maintained our well and sewer at our expense. I still do not understand why we should pay you.
So I apologize. So basically and you may have to rely on some of the mapping. Assuming your property is within the yellow area that was on the map that was shown at the start of the presentation, those areas are currently serviced by the province. And so Halifax Water does not provide service on the stormwater system in that yellow area. And so we would not have, thank you, Jake, we would not be out in those areas maintaining or addressing any deficiencies of infrastructure or anything like that in that yellow area. We do in the current orange area that you see on the screen. And basically anything in the yellow, the province is currently responsible to provide service. So it's whether or not you've seen the province themselves providing service or a contractor that they may have hired to provide service in and on those streets. And come June 1st of 2022, the streets, the public streets within the yellow area are going to become responsibility of HRM. And HRM has an arrangement, an agreement with us from 2007, whereby they've requested us to maintain stormwater systems on those streets that they will become responsible for in June. So if this is approved by the board, starting June 1st, Halifax Water will be responsible for providing service and maintaining the stormwater systems on those streets that exist in the yellow areas. And it will still be the responsibility for property owners to maintain and ensure that their well and septic are operating as intended. And that is common in a lot of these areas we refer to as stormwater only customers. So currently in Fall River, there's a number of communities, Tantallon, those areas right now that fall within that orange boundary. They're well and septic. The property owners, like myself, are responsible to maintain my well and septic, but HRM is responsible for my street. They provide snow service, they provide garbage collection, and Halifax Water is responsible for my stormwater system, making sure that the water is flowing in the ditch. And the other thing to keep in mind, and we've had this conversation with some residents and customers, just because you may not see a Halifax Water truck doing anything on your street, you may see us doing maintenance 2 streets over, and your street drains to that street 2 streets over. And so when you look at a stormwater system, you have to consider that it's not just the system that you see on your street or in front of your property. It's the whole system that drains from your property ultimately until it gets to a river, an ocean, or a lake. And that's the stormwater system that we have to look at. It's bigger than just what's in front of your property or on your street. So those are things that we try to put in perspective for somebody when they are concerned about not seeing us doing anything on their street. We highlight that, you know, we were doing work downstream to make sure that when the water leaves your property, leaves your street, that it still flows properly to get to the lake or the river. I hope that helps. And certainly if anybody on the call has further questions that you would rather just have a conversation with any one of us, I'm pretty sure we can receive numbers in the chat, or we do have a page on our website where you can give your contact information and we can follow up, because I understand sometimes this is easier when it's one-on-one dialogue.
Just to add
Jake
to
just posted it.
Yeah, so just to add to what Kendra said, if you go through our website and you use the stormwater expansion site where you can put in your details and you can send us the email, it goes directly to our stormwater expansion team, and we will be able to answer your question in a more priority manner.
All right, there's someone with a hand up. So Joe Dickey, I'm going to enable you to turn your mic on and you'll be able to ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Hi, yes. So I'm in the Hailing Acres area of Lawrencetown, and you know, all the infrastructure you speak of, none of it exists. You know, the ditches per se don't even exist. There will be a ditch, then the ditch will just cease to exist. If there was any water in it, it flows onto the person's property. And in my case specifically, and it'll flow onto someone's property, and then there may be a culvert under the road. And in my case specifically, there is water that flows north of Shepherd's Lane, or, you know, downward of Shepherd's Lane. And then it comes to a rising crest, just the lay of the land. So there's just a culvert under the road. And then that culvert drains right between my property and my neighbor's property and creates a swamp in our backyard. So, and then the land behind that is vacant. And that is the case of our subdivision because it was constructed privately. And the individual who constructed it just built dirt roads and just put culverts under the road where the water naturally flowed. So all this to say there is no system. There's no system that's designed to handle water. There are ditches in some areas and water is diverted into people's properties and it is not carried forth in any other manner and it creates swampland on people's properties. I've spent $30,000 and built my own catch basin, which is a pond. So I guess what I want to say is I would have a hard time paying to handle water that is being dumped on my property. And from everything I've looked extensively at this, I don't have a culvert because there's no need for one. I'm downhill of any water flow. And I've handled the flow myself. I've put in French drains, everything. So, and I speak not just for myself, like there's everything you've said. I'm not a customer, but I speak for my subdivision, Hailing Acres, because that's the way the subdivision was built. It's just private job, few houses, and homeowners handle all the water. There's no system that does that. So I guess how do you respond to that?
Okay.
Thank you.
And I do have a question. Are the roads private or are they owned by the homeowners association or are they public roads?
No, they're public. When they were designed, they were dirt. I bought here in 2003. We joined with the city and the homeowners paid half to have them paved in a large paving program that was done on many kind of private subdivisions at the time. I think that was around 2006 or 2007.
Okay.
And to know that, like you don't even, this proposal isn't even to clean a ditch. It's like there's no service being provided here, none. It's the road has ditches because it was a road that was built. If a ditch was required just because the land flowed that way, one was made. If one was not made. So there's no system. The system we have floods people's properties with water.
Right.
That's what happened in this pretty much entire community.
So we would, as part of taking over the transfer, if we get complaints or concerns raised to us about drainage that exists or doesn't exist, or where the water goes, we do go out and we investigate. And we look to see, to your point, if there is any infrastructure there, is that functioning properly? And then we look at, should there be infrastructure here? And we engage with HRM and we try and sort out whether infrastructure should be installed, who would be responsible for it. There are going to be situations where it is a private matter. It could be a private matter between two property owners. It could be property needs additional drainage features placed on it, and those are the responsibility of the property owner. I know I have French drains on my property to deal with the water runoff and making sure it gets to where it needs to go and away from my house. And so, pardon?
That's not possible in these situations because many homes have vacant land in between them, or they're just the way the land lies, and that's where the water goes. So as the water in what infrastructure exists is diverted, it's wherever your land is what it's diverted on, and you can't dig a French drain because you're crossing onto other properties. And then you're just dumping it on, then it would be illegal essentially, because you'd be taking water that's coming off the roadways through culverts that are now the responsibility or may become the responsibility of Halifax Water, and then and then dumping it on someone else's property, which is illegal, where the origination of the water is the culvert that's under the roadway that's claimed to be infrastructure.
So we would go out and we would investigate and look at all the items that you're detailing here. And it's hard without seeing it firsthand. I have a
Yeah, and
sense.
that's actually what I fear. It seems like this is just a blanket. You're in this zone. Here's a topographical map, but nobody's actually looking to see if there is actually anything that could resemble infrastructure. And like I said, the way these communities, many of them out in this Lawrencetown area, were designed, water runoff was not part of an infrastructure plan. If you bought a lot that was, you know, in a basin, then you either brought fill in or dug a French drain, and that may run onto vacant land, like I said. So what do you do with it then? There was no plan to design to say, you know, here's a subdivision design, here's where water flows, here's where French drains are required to divert water to here and eventually end up in the ocean. That was not a factor at all. And there's nothing that extends beyond a culvert that is under a road. Nothing of any of stretch. So that's, you know, it's a case, and it does upset me to hear there's only 15 people on here, because most people would rather just pay the $142 or whatever it is. But you know, it's clear there's nothing of any way, shape, or form that could be considered infrastructure of any kind that deals with water other than a single culvert through a driveway or under the road. So,
Joe,
you know, yeah.
if I could just interject here, the link that we sent most recently in the group chat, there's a form there where you can type out a more detailed question, and within that you can include the address and any contact.
More detail than I just gave you.
I mean, as far as
other than you know, address, community name, Hailing Acres, right?
Yeah, and so what we can do is so a couple of points. We do have staff that are out gathering information on where infrastructure exists. And we need that to do our assessments. And it's all part of the process that we're going through. And getting information on historical drainage concerns and drainage information like you've provided tonight, we're able to go in and look at some of the communities and see what in more detail that you're speaking about. Part of what we're doing with these areas where there's been chronic or reoccurring drainage issues, we're flagging those and we're communicating with HRM, and we'll be sending information and requests to the province to get details on some of the history here. What have they done? What should they do? Those types of things. But it will be, we're starting a list of areas like yours to focus our attentions on when June 1st happens and we're able to go out and do work and do assessments and do investigations. And so we're going to be looking at that. And yes, I understand, you know, you're concerned with, you know, the number of attendees to this session. We've had typically on average 20 to 30 people at each of we've had 8 sessions in November, December. And typically there would be 20 to 30 people at each session, and asking a lot of the same questions that this group has been asking tonight. So I think we have enough information. I saw Saju and Mark were taking notes and looking up the area, and I think we can try and do some preliminary investigation after tonight, but get more boots on the ground, so to speak, as the process goes on, and looking at what may exist or what might be options for consideration.
If I can add, Kenda, the one thing that we're just doing now, and we're just in the process of gathering the data, because you know the province only has limited information when it comes to bridges and cross culverts, and so we're doing a lot of our own survey work on this. So we're just in the process of gathering what infrastructure is out there, and to your point, there may be some deficiencies that we'll need to speak with either the province and or HRM, on a go forward basis. But right now we're just in a data collection mode to determine, what goes where and where it should go, and that sort of thing. So it's, but as Kendra mentioned, I was looking up on the map here as you were talking and just seeing the contours and where things should go. But there's not a whole lot showing up because I don't have the culverts input into this yet. So we're in that process, but we'll get there. But it's important information that you brought forward. So thank you.
To me, it seems like here's the tax, and depending on any conflict or upheaval we get, then we'll go and even see where culverts are. So, I don't know. I would have done it the other way around. I would have gone and looked and seen what kind of infrastructure existed, if any, and then would have, made proposals based on all that data. But proposals being made and data doesn't even exist, and now you're just in the data gathering process, and we're 4 months away, 5 months away from first bills going out.
Yeah, and
Actually, the first bills won't be going out until January of 2023. So we are actually doing exactly as you proposed. We'll be completing the data collection before first bills are ever issued. The issue we have is that we cannot start expending a lot of money, sending a lot of crews out into these new areas to do some of the physical inspections we need to do until the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board actually gives us approval to do that, and we take over the service on June 1st.
Okay. I guess it would be nice to have a consultation after, because I feel I'm here having to explain all the infrastructure in my area and defend against the myriad of points, which I've read all of them beforehand, and determined that my property is one that does not have a culvert and does not make use of any existing infrastructure and actually absorbs the infrastructure that's there. So yeah, so no, that's understood. Mostly what I expected here, but thanks for your time.
Jake, is
Well,
there
your comments are
ability-
very helpful to us, because one of the reasons we're doing this consultation is try to find out where there are concerns within communities and where there are potential drainage issues that we need to investigate. So I really want to thank you for participating and for flagging this issue for us.
Is there an ability for him to place his email address or phone number in the private chat?
I've already written this question. I've written an email. I've written it at the community center on a piece of paper on the box, and that's how I was invited to this. So I don't know if nobody's read it yet. Then I don't know, but I guess I can read.
We've been kind of grouping them together, and as I said, meeting with HRM. We just were able to have our first meeting last week on some of the outcomes of the comment cards, and so that's our plan, is to do follow-ups after we get some feedback from them on some of the stuff too. So it's good that we have your contact information and we can continue with some dialogue.
All right. Thank you very much, Joe. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to another raised hand. Daniel, I'm not going to try out your last name. I'll let you correct me.
Hi, how's it going? Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It's Nemes, by the way. I appreciate you guys trying. Nobody gets it ever. It's just something that I have to live with. I was gonna ask just as a follow-up to what Mr. Dickey had brought up about the billing period. I'm sorry, I'm gonna hammer you guys with questions. I'll try and keep them as short as I can. To what Mr. Dickey said about the billing period, because Halifax Water takes over June 1st this year, and the first bills aren't going to be sent out until January 2023, if I remember correctly. I was busy writing down, so I was half paying attention. But is the bill going to be backdated to June 1st, or is January 2023 the first billing period, and then, so on and so forth? Because it sounds like what Mr. Dickey was saying, that, you know, you're doing the surveys just now after telling us that we're going to get the ditch tax and all that stuff, and you're going to backdate the bill to the 1st of June.
So I'll take this. If so, the way Halifax Water bills go out is we bill after the service has been provided. So in this case, because we have taken over, let's say we presume that we take over the expansion June 1st. So your first bill will be for the period of June 1st to March 31st of 2023. And the bills go out somewhere between January and March of 2023.
Okay.
And it will
That's what I
be for
figured.
that small period of time. And the next year, it will be from April 1st to March 31st. So it'll be a 12-month period.
Okay. A follow-up to a question that I posed earlier about, because I live on a hill, a rather large hill, I mentioned. And I know you answered kind of the question there about with the satellite imagery and the runoff and all that stuff. But how do you prove that water from my property, like the actual water, like, and I'm saying it's in a very detailed way, but like, you know, how do you know that a water molecule from my property is ending up in the ditch, right? We're getting charged a ditch tax based on, you know, conjecture at that point. I'm close to a ditch and I'm on a hill, so obviously the water is going to end up there eventually. This isn't physics world where everything is smooth and flat. There's, you know, if you were to take a, if you were to draw a line down, you know, the optimal angle on my hill towards the bottom of the hill and stuff like that, you would go through about 6 or 7 people's properties worth of backyard before you got to a ditch. So how is my water ending up in a ditch? Also, I will say, because my property is graded towards my house, so when you look at my front yard and everything, it's actually graded up. So if anything, water from the road comes onto my property.
Mark, do you want to take this?
Yeah, I'm gonna give it to Mark.
Sure. Yeah, no, this is my bailiwick. Essentially, water can travel a long distance over land. I mean, there's forested areas that drain to the streams and creeks, and there may only be 4 or 5% of the water that gets out of a forest and eventually get into a river. But when it comes to your property, if you look at whether it's contour mapping, but in this case, we have in this case it's LiDAR, so I mean it's accurate to within 6 inches. So we can look at that and say that the software that's there tells us that here's the catchment area and here's where it drains to. So if you're on a hill, you know, water's going to flow downhill. You know, the topography is such that it's water flows from a high point to a low point, and it's eventually it may not drain into our system. It may, if you're on the top of the hill, it may drain off the back and get to a stream that goes somewhere else and flows through an HRM bridge, and it doesn't get to our system. So there are all sorts of possibilities. So again, this goes to what we were saying earlier, is that we are in the process of collecting the data to see, you know, what flows where this infrastructure is, and you know, letters will go out in the summertime to say, you know, here's where your property drains to, and you know, again, you have a chance to appeal that if you disagree with where the water goes. But water, through hydraulics and hydrology, water can flow a long way overland. It's not like you look in a parking lot for a Walmart or a Canadian Tire and you see the sheet flow happening. Similar things happen in forested land, but it's the undulations and whatnot. You just wouldn't see that flow, but it's there. It's in the top 12, 18 inches that flow is happening. So it does happen.
Just to
No,
add to what
fair enough. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so just to add to what Mark said, the software, when we are trying to model the path of the water, it requires a lot of input from data. So one of the data that we have to provide is the elevation of the land, and so that could be contour, it could be LiDAR data. On top of that, it also requires to know where the culverts are, where the cross culverts are, where the driveway culverts are, where the ditches are. And in urban areas, it would be catch basins, let's say, for example. And it may not be that in rural area we don't have catch basins, but some areas may have that. So once we know all elements of the stormwater network is added to the software, it then tries to model the flow of water from the properties. And because we know individual property IDs, if, let's say, for example, if somebody asks us, where is my property and what is the drainage pattern, that's how Mark is able to figure out for each of these properties, he's being able to identify the route the water would take to get to our infrastructure, if it gets to our infrastructure. If it doesn't, then you don't get service. So yeah.
I appreciate your answer. That it does make sense, and I get it. Like you're on a hill, water flows downwards and stuff like that. And I'm not gonna argue that. It's just like I said. I mean, it's yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to ask those questions over there, but I will definitely want to have access to those topographical maps and stuff like that after all this is done, because I would like to see this. I am very interested in seeing what's happening and how that's working. It's just there's a little bit of almost disbelief in this kind of thing, because yes, water can go very far and all that stuff. I get that, but like a lot of the time, this is also dependent on the ground being saturated and not being able to absorb any more water. And if you have a really long, you have a really far distance that the water is going to travel before it gets to a culvert or something like that, like it's more than likely going to be absorbed by the ground. So that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. There's lots of times where there's no question through the hydrological cycle, water's going to get into the ground, and that's never been a question for us at all. The hydrological cycle, any textbook in hydrology will tell you and explain all that out. So I won't get into the mechanics of that here. There's not the time. But to your point, yes, water will penetrate into the ground, but there will be some that will leave and become part of overland flow. So. But I think we're getting pressed for time. There may be some other questions.
I'll just jump in here. Daniel, apologies. We are running close to the clock, and there are a few other questions we're going to try to get to.
I did have one more quick question, if you don't mind.
One more.
What are the repercussions associated with not paying this ditch tax? Because I know there are people that will protest by not wanting to pay, even after all of the appeals and everything like that, and they won't do it, and they won't want to. What's going to happen?
So there'll be interest charges applied to the account. And if it remains unpaid, we have a mechanism through the municipality whereby a lien can be placed on the property to recover the unpaid amounts.
That's actually exactly what I wanted to hear. Thanks.
All right, with 2 minutes left, there's a question from Debbie Simmons. Are there HRM properties without sewer and water who are receiving stormwater maintenance now?
Yes, there are. There's a number of communities, Tantallon area, Fall River area, and different areas. And some communities, they may have water and stormwater. They may have only water and wastewater, or they may have wastewater and stormwater. There's a number of combinations, but we do have probably 15,000 customers, plus or minus, that are only receiving stormwater service and are on well and septic.
All right, and with that, I think we will wrap up. Thank you very much to everyone who attended, who asked questions. Anything to add, anyone else?
No, I just appreciate people taking time out of their schedule to learn more about stormwater billing and infrastructure and management. And, you know, as I said, please go to our website for further information, or have, there's mechanisms to reach out to us for further discussion and more details. And we will be continuing to communicate with all of the communities as this progresses and as we hit milestones and get certain information in place. So thank you very much for your time. We very much appreciate the dialogue and the conversation and the questions. And Kathy, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that, but
I just echo your comments, Kenda. Thank you to everybody who attended tonight. And I also want to extend my thanks to the Halifax Water staff who worked hard on putting this presentation together and doing their best to answer people's questions. Thank you.